Chastity belts, devices that some women were forced to wear in the past to prevent them from having sex. Pendulum. This entirely fictional instrument was a sharp, convex-shaped, suspended blade which was swinging over the victim, who was tied to a wooden bench. Pincers. Torturers heated the tongs until they glowed red before pinching bits of the victim's flesh and ripping them off. Throughout human history, the practice of torture has been employed by various civilizations and societies as a means of punishment, interrogation, and control. How far are humans willing to go in the name of power, punishment, and control? With a large opening for the neck and two smaller openings for the wrists, the shrew's fiddle locked its wearer's head in place and restrained and immobilized her arms, which were essentially handcuffed in front of her face. The drunkard's cloak was an empty beer barrel whose top and sides had been cut to form a hole for the head and arms of the wrongdoer. The culprit would then be placed inside to be paraded and pilloried around the streets as an object of community ridicule. The objective was clearly to generate shame. The guillotine is a device used to behead people, consisting of a tall frame with a weighted blade that falls on the victim's neck. Known as Schandmasken in Germany. Shame masks were used as a humiliating punishment throughout the Middle Ages up until the 18th century. Driven by the idea that female speech was problematic, they were nearly exclusive to women. The rack was a torture device used at the Tower of London, a royal palace that also served as a prison. Starting in the 15th century, the yeoman warders who worked at the tower used the rack to pull on ropes tied to a victim's wrists and ankles. This stretched the body and dislocated the victim's joints.
I love this place. Reminds me of the Saw movies.
Popular in medieval Europe, as well as some Asian countries, the punishment of being sawn in half was a cheap and simple form of execution, often employed on accused witches and sexual minorities. Death by burning is an execution, murder, or suicide method involving combustion or exposure to extreme heat. It has a long history as a form of public capital punishment, and many societies have employed it as a punishment for and warning against crimes such as treason, heresy, and witchcraft. Branding, also referred to as stigmatizing, the process by which a mark, usually a symbol or pattern, is permanently burned into the skin of a living person. The resulting scar would be used to indenting an enslaved, oppressed, or otherwise controlled individual. Rat torture is the use of rats to torture a victim by encouraging them to attack and eat the victim alive. The trap was then heated until the rat, now panicking, desperately sought any way out they could. After hanging, breaking with the wheel was the most common means of execution from the early Middle Ages to the beginning of the 5th century. Murderers, rapists, thieves, and traitors were strapped to a public stage, and a spoked wooden wheel would be dropped on their limbs, effectively shattering the bones. Also known as hanging in chains, gibbeting was the practice of locking criminals in human-shaped cages and hanging them up for display in public areas as a warning to others. The gibbet itself refers to the wooden structure from which the cage was hung. The executioner was a necessary but despised figure in society, viewed with a mixture of fear and fascination. Although usually employed by the local government, they were shunned by society and forced to live on the fringes of towns. Less than 500 feet from where you now stand lies the site of the demolished Salem jail. Originally built in 1684, it was one of 4 jails where the majority of the accused Salem witches were held. Also from here, Giles Corey was taken to an open field and crushed to death in an effort to force him to stand trial. The conditions were filthy, dark, lice-ridden, and the imprisoned would be charged for their room and board, plus a fee for their chains. During the 16th-17th centuries, common belief held that a witch could be discovered through the process of pricking their skin with needles, pins, and bodkin's dagger, like instruments for drawing ribbons through hems or punching holes in cloth. This practice was derived from the belief that all witches bore a witch's mark that would not feel pain or blood when pricked. The origins of hanging at the gallows can be traced back to ancient times when it was used as a form of punishment for various crimes. Over time, different variations were developed to make it more efficient and less painful, such as the addition of a long drop to ensure instant death by broken neck. Hanging remained a common form of execution until the 20th century, when it was replaced by lethal injection and electrocution. Used for punishment by public humiliation from medieval times to the early 1800s. Once locked into the mechanism, the prisoner would be pelted with rotten eggs, dead animals, and feces by members of the public. Additional abuse was often administered by rowdy crowds, such as facial mutilations, severe beatings, branding, and cutting off the ears. Until the early 18th century, ducking was a technique used to establish whether a suspect was a witch. The device was placed along the edge of a river, and the offender, who would be strapped to the chair, was repeatedly plunged into the cold water in an effort to coerce a confession. This technique was later simplified, tying a rope around the waist of the accused, and she was thrown into the river. If she floated, she was deemed in league with the devil. If she sank, she was cleared and dead. Despite ongoing activism, torture is still being reported in over 141 countries from every region of the world. Make a powerful statement today by donating to Amnesty's international Stop Torture campaign.